just going to talk, really.
Right, that's what I like.
You know?
Rap about things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're not, what I'm interested in doing is not something about, you know...
No, things, just about
things, about
yeah.
life in general.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, and things like that.
Great.
Cigarettes and beer.
Definitely part of the...
Food of the god. Okay, and you can roll that. Just so we get a few minutes on there. Just close enough. One thing, remember we interviewed people at your birthday party?
Yeah.
Remember that? And one thing that I found consistent is I would ask people to describe you to someone who never met you. And descriptions I got, some people use the word wizard, some people use the word mage, visionary, magician.
Wow.
In your mind, I mean, how do you feel about those descriptions?
Oh, I love them, Bill. I believe in the wizard. I like the wizard concept. Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always been interested in magic and music and mystic things and extraterrestrial stuff and occult stuff, you know. It's always been a great interest of mine. And I've had some experience with it. You know, I did magic ever since I was a young kid. And I also became a numerologist at one point. I don't know if anybody...
No.
I don't think I ever told you that story.
Which branch?
That's a wild story. I just told that story. I can tell you the story of that. It's quite yeah, it's quite an interesting story. How I became a numerologist. I think I've told Bill and Nina. They knew about it. But I just brought it up this weekend when I was with these folks. Let me think. Well, in 1969, I was living in 18th Street, East 18th in Manhattan, Chelsea area.
Okay, Perry, I do have to do one thing.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You got to get a little technical here.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because we're losing your mic.
Uh-oh. Put it on that. Maybe that one.
I mean, that's not going to be as pretty.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, now I need to reset the levels.
Reset.
Okay, who were you telling that story to?
Well, no, I was just telling you this weekend, there's some people up there, somehow it came up.
Can you start over, 1969?
1969, I was at St. Mark's bookstore. I think it still exists. And I came across a little paperback called Numerology. But what struck me was that the guy who wrote it was named Vincent Lopez. And I don't think you might not have known him, but older folks would know him from the 40s, 50s, even up to 60s, 70s. He was a Latin musician, somewhat like Guy Lombardo. You know, in the 40s, a lot of the Cuban music came over and enjoyed jazz, and it was a thing that happened in the 40s. Dizzy Gillespie brought in a lot of Latin people, but Vincent Lopez was something like Guy Lombardo, a commercial Latin orchestra. So I knew, and I liked his music, it had bombos and things, and so I saw this book, and I flipped out because I had his records at home. And I said, what's this numerology? I said, what? And I opened the book, and it says, you might wonder why a musician is writing a book on numerology. Aha, but everything is numbers, vibrations, Pythagoras with the numbers, with the tones and the strings and vibrations, it's all numbers. And music is based on mathematics, you know, the whole thing. And he says that's what it is, numbers are vibrations, you know, so I wasn't even into any of this stuff at the time, occult stuff or anything, you know. But I thought it was fascinating. Plus the fact that in high school I failed math a few times. I just had some kind of block in math. I didn't get beyond geometry or whatever it was. But, so this was interesting. So I bought the book. And I went home and I read it and started doing it. It tells you how to do it, month, day, and year. You get your number. And it was like a magic thing. I've been doing magic up to that time. I mean, I knew nothing about occult fortune telling that much, you know, palm reading or whatever. So I just started doing it for the heck of it. Learned how to do it, and I went to a party about a week later, and a friend of mine, Lydia Saltzman, actually was an old friend of the Insect Trust in town. Do you know about that group?
The Insect Trust.
Yeah, that's one of the old, we're going to jump around now, that's one of the old Hoboken groups that Luke Faust was in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and they were a beautiful group. A lot of them came from Memphis, and they came up through New York, and they moved in Hoboken. That was like 68, 69, 70, 71. And that's when I was not living here, but I discovered Hoboken in 68. Robert Palmer was also in that group. I mean, we're jumping now, but it's okay.
That's fine.
It's fine to go. So Robert Palmer was the big critic of the Times years ago. I don't know if you remember him. He did all the folk, jazz, blues. Not Robert Palmer, the musician. He was a musician, but this is a critic of the Times. But he was in this group, Insect Trust, and in '68 there were a lot of little bars around here, and many more little places to play, all over town. You know, not heavily advertised, but it was just music was really a part of town. You know, all kinds of stuff, jazz, rock. You know, I mean, I played for years at the Court Street with a plumber.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw you.
Did you ever see it years ago? Do you remember that?
Out there in the early, I guess.
Yeah, the early '80s, right? That's when we.
I didn't know you then.
No, but Mark Whitecage was in that. My great friend Mark, you know, and we played every Friday there, and it was terrific. It was just great, you know. And there were other places around, little places. I mean, there was a place on Washington Street. This now was a bank on 4th and Washington, Club Doral. So Robert Palmer, who was in it. Now the Insect Trusts, there are records of them that they're out of print, but like Jim Hantz, our Hoboken historian, has some, and Luke might have some. And that was a group ahead of its time, because that was like rock, jazz, and folk. 1969, 1970. They made one record for Atlantic. Let me think of what. So, yeah. So I met these. Well, actually, there was a thing called Electric Circus in New York. Did you ever hear of that? Electric Circus. This was a fantastic experience. This was also on St. Mark's Place. Well, it was that big building on St. Mark's, a big blue building. It's a Polish thing. It's between, you probably passed it. But the Electric Circus was a concept of having a real electric circus. This was like late 60s, early 70s. I mean, you'd come in, and they had great bands at the time coming up there. Chambers Brothers, Donovan came by. This was the height of the 60s. But what made it outstanding is it was a big space, and there were strobe lights like in the 60s and everything, and the rock bands happening. But what blew your mind is that all of a sudden the spotlight would be up on the ceilings, high ceilings, and there'd be an aerial act. They'd got trapeze, you know, and there'd be like tightrope walkers, and then there'd be magicians and clowns and dancers happening all through this place. It was called Electric Circus. Very wonderful thing. It lasted a couple of years. And I had a girlfriend at the time, a dancer, who worked there. And she had met some of these Insect Trust people who had just come from Memphis, and some of them were doing puppets, and one was doing tattooing, painting tattoos, and she met these people first, and that's how I met all these people, and they were all living in Hoboken at that time.
You were not.
I wasn't living in Hoboken, no. I just moved to Hoboken about, gosh, it's almost been about 10 years now that I've actually been living here, you know. But I'm going back to the 69, 70, all this stuff happened around the same time. So Robert Palmer was a great writer as well as a clarinetist and saxophonist in this group, and he got work on Times, and he started being a real writer and getting gigs. So he turned me and Mark onto all the gigs that he used to have in town here, all these little clubs and places, you know. So from '68 off and on, I've been coming here all through the years. I've seen it change, you know. I've been through a lot of great musicians lived here. I've seen all the artists that come here, you know. You know, and this town, I love it. I mean, we were a little afraid for it in the '80s when things got taken over, you know. Well, you've been here, what, 10, 15, yeah, so you caught, you know, there was still some more stuff going on, you know. We'd like to get it more going, more happening now. I mean, there's not as much opportunity, I think, to play in town as there was, especially different kinds of music, you know.
That's very true.
That's the one thing I feel a little sad about, you know.
So you went to the party, and these people were there.
Oh, the numerology thing. So my friend Lydia Saltzman, who was a friend of the Instant Trust, that's what she did tattoo. She did painting, kind of tattoos at the circus, and my dancer girlfriend Terry met her, and that's how we came out to Hoboken. And she was very much into occult. And in fact, when I went to this party and I just did her numerology for the heck of it. I'd had the book a week or so, and she flipped out. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just following the rules, you know, it tells you what to do. And she said, "Oh my God." She says, "Guess what?" She says, "I'm booking an occult festival at Abraham and Strauss in Brooklyn." She says they have the third floor of Abraham and Strauss, and they're going to have all readers on the whole floor, Ouija board, tarot, every kind of thing, you know, free to the public to come, you know, during the day. And she said, "But we don't have a numerologist. You want to do that?" And I said, "Wow." I said, "Well, that would be wild." I said, you know, I was into it. So she said, "Okay, you have to set up an appointment. I have to tell you the woman who runs the thing at Abraham and Strauss. You got to go there and do it for her. And if she digs you, you're in, you know." So I went. I just did this stuff, you know. And she dug it. She said, "Great, you're in." So like 1 week here, I'm in this. Often it's Vincent Lopez, this musician, you know, happened to be, and later in the book it says that when he performed at big hotels like the Taft Hotel, all the famous hotels in the 40s and 50s, in between sets, he would give numerological readings right out on the stage to people. He'd have people come up and through the microphone. He'd say, "What's your name?" And he'd do this as kind of an in-between thing, in between his sets, you know. So this guy was phenomenal. Anyway, it was really interesting to me. As I say, number-wise, it was interesting because mathematics and higher things, but this was more of an understanding way, kind of quote spiritual or symbolic meaning of numbers, you know. Although a lot of the numbers derive from mathematical principles. But, so I went to do this Abraham and Strauss for the woman who's running the whole thing, one of the executives. She liked it. She said, "Okay." She said, "You start next Monday." I went, and it went on for a full week. And it was wild, man. All this. I had my little table there. I was wearing a turban, and I had a signed numerologist. And so I started doing it. And see, for me, in a way, it was like doing magic and working with people and music. I knew people, and I could talk to them. So it was like a fun thing. I didn't take it too seriously. All I was noticing that that something really happened. I didn't know what it was. I would hit certain things, you know. People would say, "Oh, wow," you know. So I did this. I forgot what we all got, some $100 a week at that time, whatever it was, you know, from 9 to 4 or something, for a week, every day. Whole room of all kinds of readers, and people came in and packed lines, waiting for each person, you know. And the first few days was great. I had a ball. I just do a quick thing with the numbers, and it'd take about 2 minutes, and there'd be lines of people, and I'd have a ball. And afterwards, we'd talk with all the readers, and we'd have a big talk. But during the week, something happened that really flipped me out, because a woman came, an older woman, sat down to get a reading. But as soon as she sat down, I looked at her, I said, "Uh-oh, there's something about her that's a little more difficult." I said, up to then, there'd been fun and games. You just tell people light things. But this woman sat down, and she almost burst out in tears as soon as she sat down. She said, "I have a and she told me this problem. Her son was retarded, and he's 20 years old, and he's getting worse, and he takes his clothes off in public, and the husband wants to put him away in an institution, and she can't, and it's a religious thing, you know." And here's this woman, all of a sudden, through the week, everything was cool and nice, and this is a heavy thing, and there are people waiting in line. But at that moment, it came through my mind. I said, I said, "Uh-oh, I didn't expect this." I said, "What are you trying to play God?" I said, "This is a serious thing." I said, "Up to now, it's been like fun and games." And this woman was almost breaking down. I mean, she was really crying. And at that moment, I said to myself, I said, "I got to get through this somehow. I got to cool her out." Like I said, "I don't know what." And I said, "I just have to do it because people were waiting. It was a heavy thing." And I somehow felt she was a religious person. And I just started talking to her about religion and God has ways. I don't even know exactly what I said. But again, you found out like later that sometimes people just need to be spoken to. And I gave her something, told her, I forget what it was, but she got up and thanked me, and, you know, tears, and she walked, and I felt great. I said, "Wow." And then the other people would sit down and became normal, but that stuck with me. So much so that when I went home that night, I developed my first migraine headache I ever had. And it went on for about an hour. I mean, I know what they are. I mean, never had one like that afterwards. And it finally went away, but I was up half the night. Then I went to work at the Abraham Strauss the next morning, and I went to the I Ching guy, Charles Ponce, who's written many books by now. He's great. There was I Ching and alchemy and things, but that time he was doing I Ching. And I told him what happened, and he threw an I Ching. And I forget what it was exactly, but the concept was that I had taken on this woman's pain. This is what psychics do sometimes when they help. I mean, I had heard about this. I never knew it yet. Because I knew when this happened, it was so intense. I said, this is a woman I can't fool around with. I said, this is... And he said that I helped her, but I took on this pain. And he explained it that way. You know, and it made sense. Later I talked to psych, said that's what can happen sometimes. If you're not careful, you're very open, you're helping. So after that experience, I started to take numbers a little more seriously, and I started getting fanatical with numerology. I started buying books. You know, there's all kinds of systems of numerology, Indian numerology, Chinese numerology, and I really went crazy. And the thing was that, okay, so the week went by at Abraham Strauss. After that, it was okay, but it was still, you know, but I started buying all kinds of books, studying every night numerology. 1 week went by of this festival at Abraham Strauss. They liked it so much they put it on for another week. So it was great. I went in for another week. By then I was really into the numbers, man. I was totally into, I mean, I was doing music and everything at the time, but there was really an obsession almost with knowing what these are, you know, seeing how they worked. And we did 2 weeks. Then the next week it went by. Then I got a call one day from Hallmark Greeting Gallery on Fifth Avenue, you know, and they said, "Oh, we heard about this great Abraham and Strauss thing, and we want to have the readers come up to the gallery on Fifth Avenue, but one by one, not just a whole room, just one person a week, sitting downstairs with the crystal balls. They made a whole thing, you know, it was total, the Hallmark Greeting Gallery." I did that. I was there for a week. People who passed who knew me, I didn't even tell many people, it was such a wild thing. People who passed would see my name, Perry Robinson, numerologist. You know, they go downstairs, there'd be lines of people waiting. I got into it, though. I was into it. After a while, I was really into it. It was working. I locked into it. Anyway, I did that for a week. And then the week after that, I was home one night. My girlfriend, Terry, I got a call about 7, 8 at night. I got a call, and she comes to me, my girlfriend, she says, "Oh, it's Mrs. Cornelia Vanderbilt Whitney's secretary on the phone." I said, "What?" I couldn't imagine. You know, I said, I mean, I said, "Oh my God, I don't know how she must have heard about me or something with this neurology. I don't know what, but the first thing oh no, I went to talk to her on the phone. She said, "Oh yeah, Mr. Robinson, I'm Cornelia Vanderbilt's Whitney's secretary. She tried to see you during the week because they live right on Fifth Avenue. Because we always have palmists, and we have, you know, tarot people at our parties, but we don't know what a numerologist is." And she said she tried to even see you, but there was a big line of people. So she sent me, her secretary, and she said, you did me during the week, but you didn't know it. And you passed the test, and we want you to do a private party for John Whitney and Cornelia Vanderbilt. I mean, I've been doing this now for about a month, I guess, all in all, for a month and a half since I got this book and all this stuff happened, you know. Here I am, right? Boom, Cornelia. She says, "Okay," yeah, and I said, "Oh, let me." Then I immediately thought of money. I said, "Oh my God, how much can I charge?" I said, "Well, let me see if I'm free. Let me check my book." I ran out the room. I ran to my girlfriend. I said, "Oh my God, how much can I? What can I do?" I came up with some fee. I think $150, which wasn't bad at that time for a private party. You know. So they had me come there at 8 o'clock or something. The point was, I got there, and I did so well. They had a little alcove when I came, a little private room. They were all eating dinner in the next room. And they're making these wild toasts. I don't know who was there. "Oh, we're powerful people in the world. We're going to change things." There's all kinds of wild people. And then they come in one by one. And I said, when I do it, I didn't use names. I just used the numbers. I didn't know anybody's name at all. But I could tell there were countesses, all these wild people that come to these parties, you know. And they're all wild. And I was a little nervous, but after a while, I'd been doing it already for months with people, and they just became like folks. I didn't care how wealthy they were, you know. And one guy even said, hey, I hear all the good stuff. He says, I always go to these people and they tell me good stuff. Tell me some bad stuff. You know, all kinds of wild things. So I had a ball there for 2 hours. It just went quick. Cornelia Vanderbilt would pop her head in to look, and she'd see. John Whitney was still alive then. This cat, man, he popped his head in near the end. So after it was almost over, Whitney came in at one point. He came in, he says, I'm going to wait until everybody's gone because I want to talk to you. He says, because I believe. I said, okay. So after everybody was gone, he came in and he had a drink. He was drinking a bit. He was a little kind of half, a little stoned. And he was in his 70s then, I guess. You know, this was 69, 7. And he says, you want a drink? And I said, yeah. He brought me scotch and we sat down. I did his number. He says, before you start, I want to tell you something. He says, when I was in India, I met a guru who told me things that nobody could possibly ever know. It was impossible. He says, therefore, I believe. Go ahead. You know, so I did his number. Remember, it was 4. And it's 4 is supposed to be work and organization. So I said, even though you have money, you're really a self-made man inside. You really, I gave him, you know, talking, and he flipped out. Then before I knew it, he would start talking about his childhood, start talking about Ronald Reagan at the time, who was the governor of California. He says, oh, he does dolphin experiments with ESP and stuff. And he's telling me all this wild stuff. We're sitting there drinking. And then Cornelia Vanderbilt pops her head, and he says, oh, my dear, this man is so fascinating. You got to talk to him, you know. And he went out, and she sat there, and she was talking to me. And she says, what is it with these kids today? It was a psychedelic time. She says, why are they all they're taking all this drugs? She had kids too. And I explained to her, I says, you know, I said, well, it's a thing of expansion of mind. I said, that's my business. See, I didn't even tell them at that time I was a musician. The first time I never told, I just wanted to play it as a pure, you know. The thing is, I did so well there that I got a call the next day from the secretary. She said, well, Mr. Robinson, anybody stays up that late with Mr. Whitney is special. She said, we want to use you for other things. You know, so I did about 4 other gigs. She sent me to Saratoga. I went up and did all these wild things with other psychics, you know. So that was my experience of professional numerology. It was wild. All from this book, Vincent Lopez. So through the years, you know, and then with my magic that I do a lot, you know. I do kids shows. I just did a kids show last week, one of the first ones at the Elks Club over here. You know, so yeah, so all this stuff. So that's, I guess, the wizard and that image or whatever it is that people talk about. You know, I mean, I'm into that kind of stuff. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think we all are in a sense, you know. But I love it all. I mean,
I've been reading tarot for about 2 years now myself.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as tarot numerology, do you feel? I mean, some people have different views of tarot. Some people think it's just a way of being objective, but other people feel it is a way of tapping into our universal energy.
Absolutely. It is. It's both. See, symbols, it's all symbolic. Symbols, Jung, the collective unconscious, you know, that's what it boils down to. The basic symbols that all humans have, the dream symbols that are all the same thing. I mean, they might change in locality, different, but you found that out. You know, the symbols that endure are transcultural. You can have maybe different ways of doing it. The wise man, the fool, the old people, all through history and every shamans, you know, in the ancient cultures, there's always this type of motif, you know, in different ways. So this is something that's very much into the collective unconscious, and these I think these are great methods. All these methods, tarot, and you can really get, if you understand the system and really understand it, you can really get results. And and it seems at times very mystical, but it's just that you're tapping in on certain things, and also you're picking up vibrations from people. It's a combination of many elements, you know. But I mean, a good reader can. So what's some of your experience? I mean, with that, doing readings? Have you gotten to the point where you've done readings for others? Or?
Yeah, I have. I've seen some amazing things happen in readings. Some amazing truths.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I've seen in my own readings certain cards start at one end of readings and over months move to up to the other end and eventually pass out of my life.
Absolutely.
Things like that.
Absolutely.
Certainly too many coincidences.
Right. Synchronicity.
Yeah.
You know. Oh yeah. So I believe. You know. I mean, I don't know exactly, but it works because of the symbolic and synchronicity and collective unconscious. That's you know, that's how it works. I mean, but as you say, it can be at times miraculous.
How long have you been? I mean, some people are aware of this collective unconscious. Some others aren't. When did you first tap into it?
Well, I think around the time of this numerology, 68, 69. I'd been doing magic and stuff before. I knew something about it, but for instance, I hadn't really read Jung, or I was more in fact into science, astronomy, and like Carl Sagan type of things in those days. You know, planets and the real astronomy. That was fascinating. Science fiction and all that stuff. I was always into that. Because my dad was into science fiction a lot. But I think that book really got me into the whole trip. So I would say 68, 69, I really, it clicked in, you know. And ever since then, I mean, and then my father, the most, you probably know a little about his background from the movie, you know. Where later in his life he got very psychic. When he had been a communist in the 30s with Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, the working man, you know, and most of them were atheists at that time. I mean, even though they might have been religious before, but I was brought up, like for instance, an atheist. My mother's side is Jewish, father's side is Scotch and Irish, Protestant, you know. And but Dad, when he was young, was pretty gung-ho religious. I think he used to lead the choir and stuff. But later, when he went to New York and everything changed, and the cause and the movement, and he changed, you know, the religious thing went out, wasn't important at that point, you know, for the struggle of what they were doing in those days, you know. So I was brought up. I remember this, you know. So we go to school when I was young. See, I was born in New York. At the age of 4, we all went to California because my dad started getting Hollywood film work, writing music for films. So we moved out to Hollywood. I was there from like 4 to 12, 8 years. And the reason we came back is because of the blacklist in those times. McCarthy stuff happened out there, you know, and that was a heavy trip. I mean, I was young, but I saw the effect that stuff had on people.
How did McCarthyism affect your life?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, indirectly in the sense that I saw it with my father. Well, it affected me one day because we had friends that we were playing with, for friends of the family in California and in L.A. Every Friday we'd go, and there were kids my age, and my parents and their parents were friends. And then one week I was expected to go, and my mother, and I said, "Oh, let's go. We're going to the Brants." And she says, "No, we're not going anymore." And she tried to explain to me. She says he was a stool pigeon, the husband. Gave a name of your dad, of your father. You see, the pressure was on in those times. I mean, you don't know how much you read about it, but it was people were. They had what you call a loyalty oath in those days. You had to sign something. You know, if you didn't. Not only were you not a communist, if you ever knew anybody who was, or knew anybody who knew anybody, well, I mean, it was ridiculous. You know? And many great artists, screenwriters that we knew from those days, musicians, actors. You know, they were. Because if you didn't comply, you were blackballed. Your career was shot, boom, out the door. You know, I mean, people don't know. People committed suicide. I mean, it was a heavy time. It was like the witch hunts, they called it. You know, and it went on. I mean, that was, you know. But my dad, when he heard about that, he said, "I'm not going to stand up for that." He said, he just left. He said, "No, with that. I'm not going to go on the conviction."
And what year was that?
50, 38, 48, 50. You know.
Were you around? I don't remember what year it was, but were you? How old were you during the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg?
Well, that was now we talk about that because we knew them. Very close friends. Oh, Abe Mirapol, Lewis Allen, yeah. Or Abe Mirapol. You know, and his wife. They were friends of the family. See, the kids. I used to play with them. Forget their names now. Daniel, they were adopted kids, you know, because of they're from the Rosenbergs. Lewis Allen was a songwriter who collaborated with my dad. They wrote some famous songs. You know what song he wrote for Billie Holiday? "Strange Fruit." That song that she sings, you know. And he did things with my dad. They worked together.
Did you know that guy, Gold?
Mike Gold?
Yeah, the one that...
Gold, yeah, he was friends of the family. I mean, the whole thing. I went to high school with his music and art with his son. Or one of his sons, you know. I mean, when I came back, you know, later. So at 12, I came back.
So what was your reaction and your family's reaction, father, mother? I mean, what was that living through that time like? Well,
gosh, it was a rough thing. I didn't feel it so much monetarily, you know, because when he finally, Well, that was the
I mean,
experience.
the Rosenberg thing in particular.
Oh, that was heavy. Yeah, I couldn't understand. I mean, I tried to understand. You know, of course, everybody around said it was a setup, and you know. Well, I'll tell you where I was. I was the day they were executed. I was in Union Square. I was there, and I'll never forget that shit. I must have been what, 14, 16. Union Square, and then Eisenhower, and there was loudspeakers on Union Square, all over, thousands of people waiting to hear the verdict, right? And I'll never forget this. I mean, this is a strong feeling. When they were waiting for the hour, and there was a big clock, and the radios were on, you know, and when they were executed, boom, the clock strikes, a whole cosmic cry and sigh came up from all the people in the park. It was like it was the most emotional. You know, it was wow, potent, powerful shit. You know, and so that kind of thing. You know, I mean, well, it affected. You know, I mean, I didn't understand it fully. As I grew older, I really did understand. I didn't dig that. When I was younger, I didn't realize the degree of the witch hunt, of how it messed people's lives up. How it was like not Nazi, but it was almost, I mean, on a smaller level, what they were doing to people. You know.
Did you stay in touch with the two sons?
Through the years, yeah, up to a point, 16, 18 through high school, yeah, then kind of left them. I didn't see them after a while. Lewis Allen, unfortunately, had a little fight with my dad about it. So he got a little senile later in life, and he was complaining about something they did to God. I don't know what it was. But, oh yeah, that, you know, that whole folk thing. And then we lived in Brooklyn Heights. When I came back from, so we came back from California at 50, moved to Brooklyn Heights where my uncle, my mother's brother, lived. He's a psychologist, a psychiatrist who was analyzed by Freud. Did I ever tell you this story? This is wild. My mother's brother, Joseph Wordis, he just died a month ago. He was 88. He wrote a book, Fragments of an Analysis with Freud. You can get it. And he was a socialist psychiatrist, who Havelock Ellis said, you got to go. He was like a young, really talented young psychoanalyst in the 30s, my uncle. And Havelock Ellis, this great from England, he said you have to go to have an analysis with Freud. Freud was getting older at that time, but still he said. So my uncle went as a socialist, you know. And he was, the book is wonderful. I mean, he explained the dream thing, and he said it's a great book. So that was interesting. My uncle's side, we had that kind of background, you know. But both sides of the family, Jewish side, Russian Jew on my mother's side. German, mostly Russian Jewish. My grandmother was from Alsace-Lorraine. My dad's side was Scotch, English, and Irish, you know, so it was quite a mix, you know. So when my dad met my mother, my dad and mother met on WPA. Remember WPA? You know about that? Yeah. Which was a great thing. I wish they'd do that today. I mean, if they could save the thing again, that could work, you know. It's ridiculous. I mean, look at the mess we're doing. But they met on WPA. Look what they gave, you know, Roosevelt, they gave the artists a way to make a living like everybody else. They had theater groups, music groups, art groups, you know. And that's where my mom and dad met. It was terrific. You know. We're wrapping out here. You know. Okay. Yeah, so I mean the background, you know. But then of course my musical influence comes from a lot of the folk stuff too, which is I'm really thankful. But my dad was also a very first-rate and serious composer, so we heard music. When I was growing up, I heard everything from Shostakovich. I heard all the Russian composers, that's for sure. Shostakovich and Prokofiev, you know. But at the same time, some 12-tone stuff. What do we call it? Schoenberg, you know, and then jazz, Duke Ellington, and then folk and everything. So I was very fortunate to have a real open background musically. You know. My mother was an artist. I used to paint and stuff. You know. I did puppets. We had puppet shows, and I started doing magic shows. And yeah. And my cousin's Alan Arkin. You know about that, right? You know the actor, Alan Arkin. He's my first cousin. See, on my mother's side, my mother's sister's 3 children. He's the oldest son. My cousin Bob Arkin, who some of the people know in Hoboken, he's a bass player. He lives in New York now. He played Analysis Restaurant at Carnegie Hall, my cousin Bob. It's an interesting background. on that side. So
Well,
yeah,
Go ahead.
no. So I studied acting with my cousin in California when we were young. It was wild. I studied children's acting. He's, where are you going to,
What was your evolution musically? And when did you first start learning?
Well, that's an interesting story. Yeah, see, I started with piano. I had an interesting background musically. I started on the piano. Well, Dad played piano. That was his plan. He played all the guitar, everything, but basically. But I started studying when I was probably about 6, maybe. Studied with a classical teacher, friends of my family. They were a string trio, a piano trio from Hungary, the Kempinskis. I'll never. Sarah Kempinski played piano. Their 2 brothers played viola and cello. And they did studio work, and they were around town. And they were friends of the family, so my dad took me to study with her, a classical teacher. You know. And that's when interesting things happened musically to me, because she saw I had talent, and one thing she did do was very good. She had me improvise a tune every week. Many teachers didn't do that at that time. Besides, she had me or write a little song every week, or do something, you know, creative. Besides just, you know, playing the scales and stuff. But what happened was that she, I think, thought that I think she wanted some student who she could really make into a genius, or try to push them into being a great classical player. I think maybe she thought I was going to be that way. And what happened to me, Bill, and since I've heard it happens to other young child, but I developed a block against reading. I developed a block against reading because she was pushing a little too hard. And I look back on it now, a block, which meant that I developed my ear fantastically, because I would just memorize. I would go and take the lesson through the week and just hear it and kind of finger through it and learn it. So when I came back with the music, I pretend I was reading it. I did this for months, and finally she caught on. And she was very sad. She went to my family. She said, oh my God, I don't know what to do, you know, it's just, and then we knew another woman, Blanche Langsner, who specialized in children's problems, because many kids have different kinds of problems in music when they, you know what I mean? People tell your ear isn't good, or you've been in school, you have a block. I mean, there's many things that happen to so many kids. I met so many people through life that love music and just had some bum experience, you know. Somebody told them this, or they didn't understand the problems that they were going through, you know what I mean? Teacher wasn't sensitive. This teacher was, but the second teacher, and Alan Arkin was interesting, he was studying with his second teacher also, piano at the time. So Alan's a very talented musician also. But, so I started pulling the same routine. We had these recitals. I'd start memorizing and pretending, but she picked it up right away, this woman, Blanche. She called my parents. She said, he has this block. He says, only one thing you can do. You have to switch instruments. That's she knew that this can happen to people, you know. You develop a block on a certain instrument, and you get blocked on that instrument. I mean, it's an interesting psychology. And just at that time, my grandfather, see, everybody moved out from California when we all moved out together, my mother's side of the family. And my grandfather, my mother's father, from Russia, great, Harry Werdis, great. He was an optometrist and jeweler in Williamsburg. And he came over from Russia. And he loved music, he played violin. His wife was a businesswoman. He'd be in the back room playing violin with his friends, and she'd be taking care of business. And he was a real guy. So they all moved to Cali. He one day, right after this thing happened on the piano, he happened to buy 2 clarinets, one for me and one for Alan. He just wanted us to play instruments. He just got them. It was amazing. You know, just at that time, 2 clarinets came. I remember they had one metal one and one wooden one. And Alan got the wooden one first. I remember I got the metal one. But later Alan didn't dig that. He gave me, and we traded. I got the wood. So my dad got me a teacher, a studio musician he knew, that taught clarinet, and I started playing. I started learning the clarinet. I kind of dug it, but still I was very reticent to practicing. I didn't dig practicing. He had to cajole me. You know, my dad did great things. He put up a thing on the wall, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, a little graph. So if you do 15 minutes a day, you get 5 cents a point. You know, it was really work though. He would do it, you know. And I got into it finally. I got learning, got over the blocks. Then after about a year with this guy, I went to the heavy classical. Calvin Block was then the first clarinetist of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And these are all people in that realm in Hollywood. They were all kind of very liberal, like my dad. They were all friends, socialists, you know, communists, whatever. These are people at the time that all had the same thoughts. They were all different walks of life. And Calvin Block, his daughter to this day, Michelle Block, is one of the most fantastic modern clarinet players on the planet now in terms of modern classical music. She's great. So I studied classics with him 2 years. Then we came to New York. About that time we came to New York. So I was into the clarinet. I dug it. Started digging jazz right away because we heard the 1938 Benny Goodman concert that blew my mind. That was one of the first things that really, you know about that? The year I was born. I mean, that was, you know, 1938 concert. So that's what happened, the jazz thing, the classical. Then I came to New York, went to a year of public school in Brooklyn Heights, then went to music and art high school, that was a great experience. That was really good. Met a lot of musicians there, a lot of jazz jamming. I used to cut classes. I just passed with about a 66 average, you know, a lot of music. But a lot of famous musicians went there. Eddie Gomez, different people through the years. So clarinet, but then I was playing a little saxophone in high school. I kind of dug the sax because a lot of clarinet players will pick up sax later, you know. In fact, many saxophone players started on clarinet, but then they go to sax. And I kind of fooled around with the sax. I dug it. But after a while, and then I started hearing other clarinet players, but I said, I want to stay on this clarinet because it was coming into the modern times, bebop and stuff, and there were very few clarinet players that were playing that kind of music. So I made a commitment at 16. I gave up the sax completely, as I remember it. And it was a heavy decision because at that time, how many gigs could you get in clarinet if you didn't play sax, you know? But I stuck with it through the years, you know. It was so that.
Where did it go from there?
Oh well, after high school. Oh God. High school, I graduated in '56. I went to Manhattan School of Music for about a year. But I didn't have the patience to go through a whole degree. I just wanted to play. I couldn't. Then let me think, 58, 59, 60, 61. Okay, 59, seminal year. They had what they called at the time, a very famous, legendary thing called the Lennox Jazz School. This started in '58 up in Tanglewood. This was run by two people, husband and wife, who had a big estate up there, and they loved jazz, and it was their idea. This was before any of these, now they teach jazz in all the schools, and they have all these festivals, but this was before. They had this beautiful property, and they said, let's try a jazz school in the summer. Let's get the musicians when they off for 2 weeks, and have the greatest musicians come up, and have students come and do a thing, you know, on this beautiful property. Leonard Bernstein was there playing classical music, and it was a fantastic thing to be. And I got a partial scholarship. The Modern Jazz Quartet was in residence. John Lewis, who's the head of the Modern Jazz Quartet, they hired to be the, to get all the musicians to come up. He was the head of the faculty there. I mean, so that year, the faculty, when I was there in '59, was unbelievable. Like, Max Roach was teaching. It was legendary. You know, Jim Hall on guitar. And the most amazing thing was the year that Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry came from California and blew away the whole scene with their out stuff. And Bill Evans was teaching piano. I mean, it was like, whew. Some of the students were famous. Ian Underwood from Frank Zappa, he was there. Great 2-week teaching, to be around these people, you know. You had Gunther Schuller, you had the history of jazz, the composition, improvisation. I mean, it was phenomenal. So that was great. Then right after that, '59, I got calls from some friends of mine that I had made a tape with to get into the school. Quartet, piano, bass, and drums. Those guys were in Spain. They called me. They said, we got a gig in Spain. This is 59, 60. They said, we got a gig in Spain at a jazz club in Spain that just opened up in Madrid. And they sent for me, and I went over there. Like I was 21, you know. It's the first time at 20, so I went to Europe. I stayed there a year and a half. You know, it was just a wonderful experience, fantastic. To be a real jazz musician, I said, hey, this is, and especially just playing clarinet, I said, oh my God, this is great. Then I came back, 61, the end of 61, with this wonderful experience. Man, the World Youth Festival. Now this is an interesting thing. I went to the Helsinki World Youth Festival. I'll tell you what this is. Of course, this country at that time, what, 60, 61, we were in a Cold War with Russia, see, which of course for years we were. And the Russians had an idea to have like a youth Olympics, but not of sports, of art. World Youth Festival. I think this was the first or second one, I can't remember, in 59, and they picked Helsinki. And most of the countries of the world sent their best talent, their young talent, musicians, poets, writers, you know, except this country. Wouldn't do anything about it, wouldn't even acknowledge it, you know, because we were, you know. And I heard about it through my dad because we knew all those circles, you know. And then I heard they were going to have a benefit at Town Hall to raise money. We had to raise our own, the Americans had to raise their own contingent money to get over there. I mean, all the other countries were sending their people, you know. So I went over there. That's where I met Archie Shepp, the great saxophonist. He was going over there. And Cecil Taylor was supposed to go, but he didn't make it. But just at that same time, I got a job on a boat, a student boat playing over to Amsterdam, exchange boat, not for money, but a band would play, and then kids would come over and stay with home families here, you know, that kind of thing. So I went to the World Youth Festival. I'd love to go and play at this. I said, I'm going to be over there anyway. I'm going in the boat. They said, okay, if you can get there, it's cool. And I had met Archie Shepp already. We'd played together, and I asked them, can I play with you over there? And they said, yeah. So I get there at Helsinki, the opening day, Bill. Big stadium in Helsinki. They had the opening day celebration. At that time, you had Red China, Communist China, Cuba, all these fantastic, marching in their national costumes and flags, and it blew your mind. The world, and you say, where the hell is the America so behind that? There was such a great, you know what I mean, feeling to see all these world people there, and our country wouldn't even see. And that was great. That was for 2 weeks. That was about a week and a half. I had a ball playing all over Helsinki, meeting all the Russians. We didn't speak language, but it was a great feeling, fantastic. Anyway, even before I left, now I have to tell you this, also the Army thing. Something happened with the Army. So I tried to get out of the Army. I didn't want to go in. I didn't sign the oath. But it's the same thing, you have to sign your bullshit. Oh, I've never been this, I've never been that, you know. I'd heard Pete Seeger was the first to use the Fifth Amendment on any questions like that, way back in the 30s and 40s. He was one of the first to do that. I don't have to answer, you know, because of course, after a while that got too many people started doing that, so they got wise to that. I think I used it first. I did something, but I refused to sign anything. I went down to Whitehall Street early in the morning. I just said, I'm not going to do this. And I didn't sign anything. And they kept me there. This was heavy. Everybody left. I was the only one that did that. They put me in a room there. They gave me documents, like it seemed to me hundreds of pages. They wanted me to fill out every aspect of my life, from the time I'm born to up to, I mean, it was unbelievable, the questions. You know what I mean? I had a headache after that. The second headache I had. Sat there for 2 hours trying to, you know, when you're born, your mother and father, boom, boom, everything, you know. When I came out of that, I was... Anyway, but I did get deferred for a year because they started investigating me when they found out my dad's background, you know. So I got deferred a year. Now, this is around the time of this Helsinki festival. Now, they heard about this. And somebody heard before I left for Helsinki. We got these strange calls. One newspaper, they told me, the bogus newspaper said, "Oh, we want you to go over there and would you do this for this newspaper and write your opinions about it and give us a little background of it, and bring it back." And then one morning early, the phone rang like 7 in the morning, and my mother answered it, and they asked some question about me, and it was all set up. They tried to get her to talk about things, you know. So in other words, the FBI, whatever it was, they were starting to investigate. They saw me. It was all happening at once, you know. And then when I came back from that Helsinki, there was still more of that. But anyway, after about 6 months, when I was 62, got back 61, 62. Yeah, that was about, no, that was in 62. So I got back the end of 62. And then we had moved by then. We lived in another section of Brooklyn. And that's when I made my first record. This one right here. I guess you saw this, right? This is the one that this is the first record I ever made, and it just came out in CD. You saw this, right? The Funk Dumpling? Savoy Records? This is Paul Motion, Kenny Brown. This is the first record I ever made, and it's like almost a classic now. It just came out a couple of years ago, and in fact, they have it over at, I'm getting George over here at the jazz thing over here, you know, to get all my stuff, you know. But I recorded that when I got back. I met a guy that worked for Savoy. At that time I was about 24, 25, I think. So I come back, all this stuff. I made this record. I started getting into music again. It was cool. Then finally, a year later, the Army calls me, 63. They say, "Oh, Mr. Robinson, you know, we've been checking you out, and we've decided, as long as you do your job in the Army, we don't, doesn't matter what your background." I mean, they were obviously frustrated. They just wanted to get me. I guess a lot of other people, you know, they're saying, "Hey, we'll take them anyway," you know, right? So they took me, man. Fucking 2 years later, you know, I got on it. And the wild thing, then when I went to Whitehall Street to actually go, the night before I left in Whitehall Street, right before I went down to the induction, I had a gig in Greenwich Village, a great jazz gig, my own gig. Somebody had a club, they dug me there. I had the top group playing the night that it was fantastic. We finished at about 4 in the morning. And I just went back and had sleep for an hour, and then I went to Whitehall. And then I went to Fort Dix, had basic training, which was kind of cool in a way. I mean, it was a little out, but I was in great shape after I finished, you know. And some of the people were cool, like for instance, the Revelry. They didn't have a trumpet player, so I didn't bring my instrument to basic training, but it was closer. The sergeant, the head of the CO. Oh, he says, "Get your clarinet when you go back on the weekend. We have to have revelry." I used to play revelry on clarinet. Right? In the morning goes out, you know. But the Army was a great experience. I mean, that was a wild experience. I got out of a lot of basic training because I would do card tricks for all the sergeants and stuff, you know, flip them out. And I couldn't shoot shit, you know. I was ridiculous, you know, having to, you know. So I got through that. And at that point, I put in to be a musician in the band. I knew the Army band was a high thing if you can get into it, you know. So I got that finally. This is now 63. So after basic training, they send the musicians to, at that time in Washington, D.C., they had what they call the U.S. Naval School of Music, because in those days, the Navy bands were considered, and way back in the 40s, the Navy bands were always considered, and they were, superior to the Army bands. They had really top music. Some of those Navy bands were dynamite. I mean, they were. So today the Army has its own music school, but they didn't have it in that time. So the Army would go to this naval school in Washington D.C. So that was a ball. I mean, you have to march every day, learn how to march with a thing, and you know. But there were some good teachers there. Like there were some very good classical teachers that had opted to join the Army because you know, it was easier to do music. They had some really good players there. So that's where I met 2 musicians that were there, Bill Falwell and Tom Price. Bill Falwell was a trumpet player, then played bass, picked it up. Tom Price was a drummer. And we were playing together, a little group in the U.S. Naval School. And then near the end of it, they said, okay, you're all going out to bands all over the world. And they gave us a list of all the bands in the world. But they said, well, of course, you get a first, second, and third choice because we can't guarantee where what's open, right? So we looked over the whole thing, these two guys and me. We said, it'd be great if we can be together. And boom, we see Panama. We see Panama. And we flip out. And then we start asking people around that some of the people knew about it. They said, oh man, this is great. It's like a golf course. It's like the most fantastic scene. I mean, it's paradise, So we all three put in for it. Not thinking that we'd all get it. We didn't know. We all got it. We all got it. Bill, me, and Tom Price, we all went there to Panama. I'll never forget flying into Panama with the Army uniforms. It was like with the island, palm trees, we get closer. Our barracks is right on the bank of the Panama Canal with palm trees. I mean, gorgeous, this golf course. It's like paradise. Right? It was terrific. And we had a great sergeant, a CO, what do you call it, warrant officer, the head of the band leader, who was very lenient with us, man. He was so, plus I got into Panama Red, smoking Panama Red. That was I had smoked a little bit before, but that was really the first time I really got into real smoking. I mean, I'd been around it before, but I never, in fact, I used to put it down. I used to be one of those people in my early days. I say, what do you need this? It's artificial. You don't need this. I would do these raps that people do today until I had this fucking Panama Red. We had the shoe shine guy in the barracks bring in, there's only about 4 or 5 guys out of a 20-piece band that really smoke. So every week he'd bring in a big paper bag of stuff, $20, $15, and Panama Red, the tops, So we survived through the whole thing. We have to get up in the morning at 5, whatever it is, we take a toke, could do anything, take a toke. And the band leader was a Harry James enthusiast. He was a great, he was a trumpet player who came into the Army band somehow in the early days. And he told us, he said, look, he says, you guys, he said, if you do your job, he says, whatever else you do in your own time, it's cool. Which he was basically saying, it's cool, you can smoke and you can. So that was terrific. Then we were a goodwill band. Our job was a goodwill band. We went all over South America. Yeah.
Microphone's dropping.
Oh, God.
A tiny bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we went to, it was a beautiful thing. I mean, we went to Bolivia, Guatemala, Central America. And we were a goodwill army band. We would play show tunes, Beatles things. But one good thing about our commander was that every town we go, like Guatemala, any country, he would send ahead and get some of the native folk music and send it back. So the band, whenever we went anywhere in South America, we could always play a few of the tunes of their thing, which was really great. It was a beautiful thing. Saw in Bolivia, we went to all Central America. It was terrific. Plus, when we're not working, we got jobs playing for the offices, clubs, making money. I mean, it was really, it turned out to be paradise in a way. I mean, it was, and I met these two guys, Bill and Tom Price, Bill Farlow, that I had a group with for many years after. We were so close that when we lived on Army unemployment in Brooklyn. We got an apartment together in Brooklyn Heights. When we came out of the Army, we lived there for about a year and played music. Wild stuff.
So where did you go from there? What was the name of the group?
The Uni Trio, I called it. It's very famous. Famous at that time. Now, when I got back, there was that's another thing.
What year is this?
This is now 65. I get back in 65. Overall, it was 2 years. Year and a half in Panama. Now, I knew something about the free form music and the psychedelic music, like Ornette Coleman I'd already known. When I went to Spain, before I went to Spain, I'd just come from this jazz school, and Ornette Coleman came from California as a student. John Lewis brought him as a student. He turned the whole place around there because he was playing this new kind of music. They either loved it or they hated it. There was no in between. But he had that free thing, and I was kind of in my mind getting there, And then, so by the 60s, and then 65, there was this full free jazz going on, Cecil Taylor, Ornette, free-form jazz, psychedelic, forgetting all the chord changes, just playing free, really getting to feel what it is to play your instrument, get all the sounds. You know, there was a big thing coming back. And they had a company called ESP. I didn't bring that. That was just released again. Now, ESP Records actually stood for not ESP Psychic. It stands for Esperanto. Do you remember Esperanto, the language? You know, they tried to have at one point. The guy that started this was Bernard Stolman, a lawyer. He's still up in Woodstock. I think the first record he put out in ESP was an Esperanto record, but then for short it was called ESP. And he always liked jazz. He had some old tapes of Charlie Parker that nobody had. He put those out. Then somehow he heard some of the free music of that time. Like there was a guy named Albert Eilert, one of the great, great free players, Cecil Taylor Ornette. And he didn't have a musical ear, but he heard this new out music, and he had enough vision to say, well, this is amazing. This is music of the future. He says, this, whatever it is, I don't even understand it, but it's so potent, it's powerful, something's going on here. And he formed this whole company, and it became completely free jazz company. And some of the great people that you've heard about, Gato Barberi, Pharoah Sanders, many of these great players started out there. And I did a record on there with a bass player, not in my name, with Henry Grimes, a bass player. In fact, they said that the bass player that's on Henry Grimes, it's on my first record. I was then on his record. And you should hear the difference. 62, I'm playing bebop, it's starting to go a little out. And 65, that just came out. I have it at home. He has that. That's called The Call on ESP. Yeah, they have it over there at the place in Tower. That's just bass, drums, and clarinet. And I used the drummer that I went to Panama with, Tom Price. So it was, and that got me on the map in terms. Well, the first record was very nice. That was beautiful. Got good reception, but unfortunately, it was never reviewed like in Downbeat. Somehow they missed it. It never really. It's like an underground thing for many years. That first record of mine. And then 2 years later, I do this wild free thing. When you hear the difference, it's unbelievable. You say in 2 years, what happened? Well, I know what happened. Although I started taking psychedelics earlier in life, I took them even before I was really smoking grass. You know, that's another story. How I got turned on to that. But ESP Records, yeah. So I was part of that whole free movement of the '60s. You know. And basically, I was the only one really playing clarinet. There were a few others that really specialized in clarinet at that time. You'll hear the record. I don't know if Bill and Nina heard that. I have it. So that, you know, that takes me to 65, 60. So I kind of got my career, so I kind of got known as that free kind of player. Although I was always playing other stuff, Dixieland, everything, you know, but that was such a potent movement that I really got kind of typed into that in a way, which was good at the time. Then we go up to about 69. I did some very wonderful records. Charlie Hayden, Liberation Orchestra, I did a few things. Archie Shepp I recorded with. Then, let me see, 68, 60.
What years? I understand that you were rated top 5 or
well, that was, yeah,
something.
72 and 73, around that area. Yeah, that was coming out of the 60s. And then, yeah. Had a big article in Downbeat. My name was on the front. It's 73. I won these polls, you know, different polls. Talent, the one I kept winning over and over is funny, kind of, because they have 2 polls. They have the regular poll, and then they have one called Talent Deserving Wider Recognition. And I kept winning that all the time. Like after I'd been there for 10 years, I still kept getting. It was a funny thing, yeah. Because I had made a few records, but I wasn't totally fully on the mainstream, like commercial. See, one of my things that happened in my career was that I was doing so many different things that nobody knew how to put me in a category, you know. So I look back on it, I think, you know, the people who say, oh, I said, oh, you should have been out there doing my commercial. But I was so in so many directions, you know, I couldn't be, so they didn't know what to do with me at the record companies, you know. They'd hear one record of free, and then they'd hear this one from 62, and they were so different within 2 years, you know. I went to John Hammond of Columbia, who knew my father. I went there in like 71 or 2. And I brought these 2 albums with him, and he put on a little bit of each, and he says, it's great, but what is your style? And that kind of set me off in a kind of non-commercial acceptance at that point. Now I look back on it, and I can understand it, but at that point I said, here I am, I made 2 records, and this guy, John Hammond, one of the greatest, he discovered everybody, Billie Holiday, Benny Gunn, And he tells me, you're a great musician, but what's the style, you know? And I got very disillusioned at that point. And I really, in a sense, almost gave up trying to ever be a commercial, do anything commercial. I said, the hell with that. You know? Now, around that time, now we get up to about 71, 72. I met two people at the same time. I met a guy named Gunther Hampel, who's a German musician. He had a free-form group called the Galaxy Dream Band. Mark Whitecage was in that also. We toured all through Germany in the 70s and early 80s, just playing free-form jazz. It was wild. I mean, the first time we went to Europe in 72, I went to Frankfurt Jazz Festival, and it was just me, Gunther Hampel, clarinet. He plays everything. Gunther plays vibraphone, bass clarinet, everything. And a singer, Gene Lee. It was just the three of us, and we were just playing free improvisation. We had some melodies, but very free. But I remember the standing ovation was it was a big auditorium, and we got reception like a rock group, playing this out music. You know, I said, wow. I said, Europe is fantastic. Nobody could make a living doing that. Even in the 60s, you had all this great free energy going on, but nobody was making any money. You know, it was just like experimental stuff. Nobody's taking it seriously except for ESP Records, but nobody was making any money. Go to Europe, you see they're way ahead of the game. I mean, of course, you know, because Germany, they're into Stockhausen, they're into much more modern. And Germany, artistically, they're much more. They were developed more. They accept something if it was good. It didn't matter what it was. If it was authentic and right, you know. So we got this tremendous ovations from this free music, and it was a great thing. That was another thing where I said, "Oh, America's messed up, the commercial," and then I said, "I don't want anything to do with it," you know. But at that time, then I met the Brubecks. Right at the same time, I met Darius Brubeck. He's the son of Dave Brubeck. Dave has 6 children. And I met him through a clarinet player that knew me through this Gunther Hampel, who also played bass clarinet. And he was this other clarinet player from Boston, Bob Fritz, had heard my record on ESP. And Gunther Hampel had come from Germany. To show you how ahead they were in Germany, Gunther Hampel heard about ESP in America, and he sent a record from Germany before he even came here, and they put it out. So when he came here, he had a record on ESP in Germany. You know, they were very open to. So he met a clarinet player that was playing with Darius Brubeck at the time. And Bob Fritz, who finally left, he was a composer. He taught at the Boston Conservatory, and I took over the clarinet chair in Darius Brubeck Ensemble, which was bass, drums, clarinet, and Darius on piano. You know, Darius, who's named after Darius Milhaud, the famous French composer who Dave Brubeck studied with when he was. So I joined in 71, 72. At the same time, I was playing with Gunther Hampel and this wild stuff. I joined Darius's group. Stayed with him for about 6 months, playing with just his group. And then he had they have 6 children. Three of the others were musicians also. You have today, they're great. They're still going. Danny Brubeck is a drummer. He has a group called the Dolphins, a fusion group, Dynamite. He lives in Woodstock. He's playing one of the great drummers. But what they did, the kids, and then Chris Brubeck, he's an electric bass and bass trombone double. He had a rock band and he played jazz. So they went to their dad at that point, the kids. They said, "Hey, Dad, you know, you're well known." He said, why don't you form a group with the kids and have a whole thing? We'll bring our bands. Chris had a rock band. Darius had a band with me. He said, well, why don't we'll bring some of our people from the band and you come in and we'll have a thing. And he did it. And it was called 2 Generations at Brubeck. And we went all over the world. I was with them for 3 years. You know, we joined up. It was fantastic. Near the end, I got to play with Jerry Mulligan and Paul Desmond, all these legendary guys I knew. You know, so that was terrific. Touring all over the place. We went to Australia, you know, Mexico, Germany. But at the same time, I was doing this with Dave Brubeck. I was playing this out music with Gunther Hampel at the same time. So a lot of musicians, people were confused. But still, what I was doing, they didn't know what that was. And they took it for granted because I was with Brubeck that I made so much money that I didn't need to work. And to tell you the truth, they weren't making that much money. We were sidemen. The kids got, in those days, we got 125, well, went up to 150, at 125 a concert. You know. We were playing colleges all over the country, all over. You know. We got a regular fee, 125 plus transfer, which was good. We got a lot of work, but we never made big money. You know. But that was good for my career, but at the same time it was diffuse because I was playing this free stuff. So still they didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I'm still very close with the Brubecks, with the kids, you know. So I would say basically, and then I played a lot with folk musicians. He brought up playing with hootenannies and Pete Seeger coming. The Weavers used to come over to the house, you know, when I was younger. And Woody Guthrie came one time to the house. I knew him. Leadbelly, all these people, you know, I was brought up with. You know, so it was, you know. But I remember when I made this Far Out record on ESP, my father, you know, had played it for me. He says, "Son, what is this?" He says, "What?" He says, "What is this music?" I said, "Dad," I said, "it's free improvisation." I said, you play what you feel. We had certain melodies. What is it? You let it go. He said, "I don't know." He says, you know. Years later, I got him into it, and I got him to actually learn how to play it. And when he got into the psychic stuff, he opened up into all this stuff. He understood it. You know. Oh boy, we could go on and on here. How much tape do we got?
We got plenty of tape. Let's
We should make two. Maybe we should. I don't know. What do you want to do? Go to some other things. Yeah.
let's leave history for a while.
Yeah.
And talk about, rather than your musical development, your spiritual development.
Yeah. Well, that's again the fun.
Before we do that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move this mic.
Let me. I'm gonna go to the toilet. And,
Okay. You take this off you then.
Yeah.
Okay.
They didn't give it back. They were up so tight. There wasn't anything. They kept it though. They just. Oh, you should get the new High Times. See the new High Times? It's a whole thing about UFOs. A whole thing about UFOs. An interview with Whitney Stryber. You know about him? He wrote for you. You know about this cat? He's a famous writer. He wrote all those things. The Wolfen. He wrote things that were made into movies, but he had experience. He has 3 books. One's called Communion, where he's early out. But okay.
Let's sort of make the transition from music to spiritualism in a gradual way.
Right.
Let's first do that by what is music? Define music.
Wow.
Well, what does it mean to you? Either of those questions.
Oh, well, it is a channel between the dimensions, I would have to say. It's a beautiful thing that can't be, it's like a rainbow. A rainbow, what is a rainbow? This is an interesting question. You can see a rainbow. It's colored, you can't touch it. It's a visual presence, it's a presence, but it doesn't exist in the 3-dimensional way of each one. I kind of use an analogy of music. Music is a world, it's color.
Okay, Perry, we have to put your microphone back.
Oh, God, we didn't do anything.
What I'd like to do then is...
Well, I can explain something. Oh, about that exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I forgot. Are we on?
Yes, we're
Okay. Now this is important. Major important influence on me. Something happened to me in Panama. I didn't mention this story, but I've told this story. It's very famous. This was, 64, 65. We went on these goodwill tours all over South America. As I said, before we go, we get the music of the local place. So one morning, this happened. One morning, we get up early for band 7, 6. And I think in the next couple of days, we were ready to go on a tour to Bolivia somewhere. And he hit us up there early in the morning, and he started telling us about the thing. And I think we were practicing a little, But we were up there. See, we used to play gigs in Panama City. A few of the guys were real hot jazz guys in the band, so we would go out to Panama City because we had a lot of free time. As I said, our commanding officer said, "Hey, if you just do your work when you have to do it, whatever you do in your free time is up to you," which is terrific. So I came in late this night with the guys, come in about 6 in the morning. This Panama Canal Zone at that time, there was this thing. 6 in the morning, we have to get up at about half an hour later. And we're sitting, he's rapping too. We're all sitting in our band desks, the band chairs with the stands. And we're kind of nodding off. I'm kind of nodding off, And he's speaking, "Oh yeah, we're going to go tomorrow, we're going to this and that." And I had this music paper in front of me, a music sheet, blank notepad, and a pencil. And I was kind of nodding off. He was just rapping. And I just took my pencil, and I just almost unconsciously, I'm thinking, just start making dots on the music paper, like dots, like notes, without thinking. Boom, boom, boom. Then I'd fill it in, put a bar, do, completely unconscious, just. And then afterwards, but I looked at it and I said, this looks interesting. And I took my horn up and I played this little melody that I wrote. And lo and behold, it was an out little melody. I never could have thought of it consciously. It's like a little melody, like an atonal little thing. And the first part was almost so perfect that immediately in my mind, the second half just came to me, like that, boom, it was there. And that was my first tune I called, and this started a whole period for about 2 months that I call my automatic writing period, where I actually developed this. I started doing this for about 2 months, boom, boom, do this without thinking. Sometimes, many times they're almost complete. Other times, you know, it was basically there, but your mind would fill in the right thing, you know. But basically, all the concept came from automatic writing, and the melodies that came out were all interestingly kind of similar in a strange way, in the sense that they were kind of atonal melodies. I mean, I never would have thought of it consciously to compose. I had written up to that point more straight ahead jazz tunes, you know. This is completely. And I tried this that morning, and I said, oh my God. And then for the next 2 months, I start writing these things. And I didn't know how to play them. I said, well, how would we improvise on these? And Tom Price and Bill Fowler, the drummer and bass player that had come with me from the Naval School, who we were in Panama together, we start going out on the banks of the Panama Canal. See, our barracks, you have to picture this, the barracks, beautiful, the banks of the canal were about 20 feet from the barracks. You just step out and you walk right, you're in the barracks with palm trees. You're right on the bank of the Panama Canal. So we got into it every night. We would get stoned, and we'd go right out on the banks of the canal, right in front of the barracks. And we take these melodies that I wrote, we try to figure out how to improvise on them. Because I had no idea either. They just came out in this strange way. And that's how we developed this concept of the uni trio. We were playing most of all just these strange compositions. And we slowly developed a way of how to improvise on them. It kind of dictated how, you know, atonal, strange things. And
Are there any recordings?
yes, well, through the years, I've recorded every one of them, almost. There's about 10 of them. In one form or another, I've recorded almost all of them. Of course, some of the records, like I say again, one of my problems is recording through the years. Some of these companies are very small and they go bankrupt or they stop, and then, you know, fortunately, some of the major records they're putting them out again. But my new group, my quartet that you never heard, I don't think, it was a Paradoxan Quartet. That's the one I've had for 10 years, but we don't play so much here, unfortunately, in the States. But I think in December we're going to get together and play here, because that's one of my major groups. It's a Russian pianist, Simon Nabokov. Bill and Nina have heard the group. You know, I've recorded some of those tunes with them. One of the tunes called, there's a tune that I call The Call, which is my theme song almost, which I developed. Now, I developed that song way before in the Army when I was young. One of my first psychedelic trips, I was out in the garden. We had a place out in Shelter Island, the family. I must have been about 21 or 22. This is just way before. I took one of the first trips on acid. I mean, my parents were away I had the place. I brought up Bill Fowler, the bass player after the Army. I brought him up to my parents' place. They were away for the weekend. We tripped. And there was a garden out there, and I took my horn, and completely tripping. And I started playing to the plants and the bees, and I'm completely out. I went up to a bee, and I was doing this shit. And all of a sudden, I came out with this out melody when I was on the psychedelics. I called The Call. And it's just I do a certain thing with the fingering, and it's a, yeah, I don't think you've heard it, but it's almost my theme song. You know, that I use all through everything. It's called The Call. I recorded it with the Brubecks. I did it with different methods of doing it. Anyway, that's early psychedelic influence of a tune that has kept with me all through my career. It's a basic tune that kind of is my theme song in a way, because I do it many different ways, but the impetus basically came from a psychedelic evening of playing to the animals and the birds. And you know.
So let's go back to defining music, because we missed that.
Oh my God.
So.
Well, I mean, it's psychic. I was saying, you know, it's there. You can't touch it, you can't taste it, you know, but it exists. You know, it's like a rainbow. So therefore, it spans dimensions. That's where it's spiritual in the sense that it's of this world, but not a part. You know, it's like because, you know, music of the spheres, everything's been music. Kepler, all the things they've talked, the universe has sound, has music. In fact, Ornette Coleman once told me the most out thing when I was at the jazz school. Dig what he says, you know, he says, I feel that the universe has a basic tonality. He says, and the funny thing is I can hear, he says, but I can't hear the basic tonality, I can hear the fifth. He says, I can hear the fifth of the note. He heard a note that the unit, and he said, I can't hear I hear the fifth of the tonality of the universe.
So what do you
And he has a whole, to this day, he has a whole school built on that called harmolodics. Harmolodics, it comes from that. It's the fifth. Basically what it boils down to is that instruments should play in the key that they're written, not transpose. Let every instrument write music, but let every instrument play in the key that they're actually written.
So where do you think music comes from?
The universe, it comes from us. It's music without, I mean, I can't even say we created it. I say it was there, you know. Because then again, what is music? Get back into numerology. Vibration. It's vibration. Music is vibration, you know. That's basically what it is. Like the universe is vibration. I mean,
what role do you think music plays in the universe?
Makes us aware that we're part of the universe. That it keeps us in remembrance that we are part. We're not separate. See, one of the things I think that's happened with music too, especially some of the real commercial music. I mean, you could say it's bastardized. I mean, all music is great, but I'm talking about this music as sound, as pure music. I mean, when you hear jazz players or some even the great classical works, they transport you into a spiritual world. It's a connection between earth and spirit. Music is a direct link between earth and spirit. The earth, the human being in a three-dimensional physical body, and with all the rest of the dimensions of the universe. You know, it's the link. It's like a rainbow. You know, it's like, I mean, because, you know, music is of itself. It doesn't point to anywhere. It goes to itself. It doesn't. It unfolds by itself. It's not necessarily going to some, you know, it's of the moment. There again, it's of the moment. Music is it's one of the few arts that's of the moment. There's no reference points, you know, in the sense that, I mean, I'm talking about pure music. It's of the moment. You're there, you're doing it. You know, that's why, yeah.
You say you feel that people have lost some of that connection.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's happened?
Oh, I think our society, well, I think it goes way back. Where man, we split from nature. You can say the left and right brain, whatever it is. We split from nature. You know, it's. I think, you know what they always say. They always blame Descartes for this. You've heard this. You know Descartes. He says, "I think, therefore I am." You know, they say when that started, that split everything up, because prior to that, you know, ancient people, they didn't have. In other words, the gods, the goddesses, everything was alive, animistic, you know.
Now, the Druids have always said that the Druids are very close to nature, and they saw the split coming, and they knew they would be wiped out because of it. But they said it was supposed to be at this time, that it was an ever-changing cycle, that this is part of the cycle. How do you feel about that?
Well, I have to accept that. You know, I really do. I mean, I accept that. No, I do. I accept everything that's happened. There's I don't know, you call it reason. You know. I say that the human being is so complex that we have to split our left and right brain, all this stuff. You know, we have to try out everything possible, even if it's coming close to blowing ourselves up. The human mind is that way. But it also has been split. The reason we have the wars, everything, is because man's domination over nature. Man has forgotten. He's separated from nature, tries to control nature. Doesn't realize he's part of nature. Part of nature, not the aggressor, the one who. And the Western. You know, it did that. I mean, wars, everything in life is because of man's. It's basically, man's insecurity, understanding his part in the universe is basically what happened. You know, and then religion, all kinds of things. Like you say, the Druids, before they were living with nature, thousands of years before that, man was just, you know, everything was alive. Animals, you talk with everything. You know. And as man developed his intellect and the brain, or the left brain, it became more dominant, and a true split, the left and right brain, true split occurred between the two brains. There's no doubt.
Do you think it's going to go back?
Yeah, well, that's now the point. The point is that it has to come back. Well, yes, I think it's destined to, if we can, if we can keep ourselves on the planet. I think all the prophecies, I really am convinced that things are moving so quick by you know, years ago, the age of Aquarius, this and that. By 2000, 2010, I mean, we're going to see unbelievable changes in the next 5 or 6 years. Things are speeding up amazingly. And in terms of, I mean, a lot of things are going to be manifest. There's talk, you know, then there's of course, the shifts in the planet. You know, there's going to be a lot of stuff. I mean, my cousin Alan Arkin just moved. Well, he has a guru. He got spiritual when he was young, not young, when he was in his. He was pretty well known, but he met a guru. Anyway, he just moved to. He lived upstate New York. He just sold his. He bought property in Canada, because there's a prophecy that, you know, well, you've heard it. The East Coast is going to go, the West Coast, all kinds of the south of Mississippi is going to go. You know, this all this kind of dire stuff. But also, it's all. And then the Earth is Gaia, the Gaia hypothesis. Earth is a live organism. You know. A lot of this is. The Native Indians spoke about this. Mother Earth. She's responding to all this. The world, the shaman, you know, they all say it. The Earth, you know, and man's arrogance to think that he, you know, but it really comes out of man's fear of not understanding. When the split came, he couldn't understand the immensity of the cosmos, how he came from, how it's just as much part of it as anything else in the split. Then he tries to control it. And certain religions, I mean, the concept of religion is great, but the religions got political, and they try to.
On that subject, I mean, lately in the past, 10 years or so, the growth in occult-based religions, Wicca, even the Druids, and all the shamanistic religions. What is your opinion?
Well, that's great. They're coming back now. That's good. That's an antidote. That's the real strong help. Yes, absolutely. I'm glad to see that. I think it's positive. The shamans, you know, I've been reading some things. I mean, I've known about them. Shamanistic here. You know, just look at the place like the Open Center, as an example, right? I mean, they're commercial, but I think they're doing all kinds of stuff there. Fantastic. I played there a few times. Yeah. Huh?
Have you?
Yeah, I played there. Yeah, about 5 years ago. In fact, I want to go back now with this tabla player, Bottle Roy. I think we could do a nice thing there.
Do you think, of all this new growth, do you feel any of it's misdirected? Or what's your feeling on that?
Well,
I know a lot of people who feel like, for example, a lot of the Wiccans are getting into hexes and negative magic.
Yeah, well, see, you have to say, there always is with these movements. You see, it's like magic, you know. What's Wicca magic? What is black magic and white magic? What is that simply? You know, black magic, perverse use of your will for your own benefit. The use of will for your own benefit, black magic. You know, white magic is working with everything. Black magic is ego-centered magic, where you realize, because the thing about a lot of these things is, if you study some of the methods, you can get some of the powers, you can get some of the influences. You don't have to be a pure thinking person. I mean, you know, up to a point. You can learn. Anybody can read tarot. They can do different things. They can use it. You know, you can read into that. That's one of the strengths and one of the difficulties of a lot of these methods, is that you can read into so much stuff. You can, just like the Bible. Look at the Bible. I mean, you know. And I think it's up to the person. You know, the persons, they're going to be negative, and they're going to pick this thing, and they're going to think it's good, they give them power, but they, you know, and it's also fringe people that come to these things, and they mess it. Like all the great, even the Indian gurus, you know, who was the famous guy of the 60s? Rajneesh. Did you ever hear about him? I knew people that went with him. He had chaotic meditation. His concept was great. He says, hey, the Western people are fucked up sexually. He says they're completely messed up because of the puritanical background. And he says, and his concept, which is interesting, because you have, you know, in the 60s and 70s, you have all these movements of the Eastern Indian, especially the Hare Krishnas and things like this, you know. These are Western people who are trying to live that way. And he was saying, and Alan Watts said this too, he says, first of all, we have our own tradition of Western magic that people don't know about. We have our own tradition, the alchemists, you know, going back, I mean, that come from, you know, but people don't know about. They're going to all these Eastern religions. We're not Easterners. We can learn some of it, but Rajneesh's concept He says, look, we have certain blocks. If we just try to live exactly the way they do, that's not, we're not geared to that. I mean, we can take certain things. That's why he was misinterpreted. What happens is some of these teachers have a good idea, but then it gets so popular that they have to appoint people to work with them. And many times the people that they appoint to be their right-hand person go on an ego trip. Because they don't have, they're up to a certain level, they've learned from the master, but still if they have a little bit of anything negative, they're going to fool themselves and start to give, instead of say, oh, the guru told me this, and I'm doing, this is what happened to a lot of movements, I'd say, not so much the guru. I mean, Rajneesh, he got called because he had a sexual freedom thing. He said, look, he says, yeah, that's a big problem in the Western world, completely. He said, so chaotic meditation, you go completely. I mean, I could understand it, but.
Speaking of Western religions, what about like the whole Alistair Crowley Golden Dawn thing?
Yay! Bring it up. I was going to mention those great people, the great three classic people. Everybody should. About three of them, but of those times, the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley. That period of time was one of the heavy. Madame Blavatsky, Alice Bailey. You had some very potent magi's and people at that time. The Golden Dawn was amazing. But even within the Golden Dawn, they had all kinds of ego trips going on after a while. See, this is the problem. When you have power, how to use it, you get all this knowledge and you can go crazy, Now, Crowley was a fascinating guy. I mean, I got to give him full, man. I've read quite a bit of his stuff. I've even seen the Golden Dawn stuff. I had friends that had all the collections, I've read some of the original people. A beautiful thing, but there again, when it gets into a hierarchy, you're going to get power things, people are going to come in, because that had some of the great artists of the time, Keats, and but you're going to have a fight between the Alice Bailey and different people. You can have Crowley, the Beast and the whole thing.
So how do you define pure spiritualism?
Pure spiritualism. Well, it's the power thing, living without fear.
Fear of what?
Of everything. Fear of the unknown. Fear that we don't know who we are. Fear of helplessness. Fear that we're adrift in a universe that we don't know what the hell's happening. Here we are, human beings. I mean, this is the basic concept. And religion try to do it in one way, science, and nobody has the answer, I'll tell you, the greatest thing happening is modern physics are coming on strong. Physics now, they're getting spiritual without, they have, what they're discovering in the last, you read all these new books, Michio Kaku's book, Hyperspace, what they find out about 10 dimensions of space and all this stuff, and this is all stuff that the ancients talked about, ancient Vedas, and ancient Indians talked about. It's the same stuff, you just coached a different way. The Tao of physics, this started happening years ago, but the physics is the way to the whole thing.
I haven't heard that name in a long time, Michio Kaku. I used to listen to him on WBAI.
He's still on, and he has a best-selling book now. It's called Hyperspace. You gotta get it. It's in paperback. It's the best thing. Oh God, he's out there.
On the fear question, are you familiar with Starhawk?
Isn't that a channeler?
No, she's a
oh no, she's a Wiccan or
feminist,
Yeah, I don't think I've read too much, but I know about her. I can't say I've really.
She once had a quote that I've always loved that said, "Where there is fear, there is power." Meaning power over you.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
Fear,
well,
you can give people power over you.
That's what, and that's what you can use that as everything we're talking about. What happens in these groups? People, fear, abdicate. Somebody. You can do it in this country, the president, hey, somebody can, the mother and father, they know everything. We don't have to do anything, just follow, But it's fear. And it's fear because we have lost the connection that we are with the universe. And we're on a drift, see a drift in the universe. Who has an answer? One way religion gives different answers. Science never gives any answers. The science can give no answers, ultimate answers. But now what I see is religion and science becoming one, like it used to. It's going to become one. With it won't be the words. Be either a new word. Religion and science are one and the same thing, just different aspects.
One thing that when I was interviewing people talking about you at your party, and another recurring theme came up that I've experienced talking to you as well, and that you have looked into people's souls and pulled things out they weren't willing to admit to themselves.
Right.
Now, how do you think
Right.
are you conscious that you
Yeah.
do that?
Yeah.
And how do you think you do that?
Well, I just think it's something that I came to. You know, I think in numerology, doing a lot of that stuff really got me into it because I was intense with people there. You know, and sometimes you take stabs. See, I learned intuition, trusting your intuition. That's what it is. Because I learned the numerology. You must at times, I don't know if you can readings to other people. Sometimes you just get impressions, or you're not sure. It's intuition. That's again, the intuition has to be developed to as strong as the intellect. Our intellect is overtaking the intuition, and it fucks up. I mean, they should work together. Maybe they're not really separate in a way, but we've separated that. So I learned through that numerology. And I always was good with people. I mean, magic, and I obviously, you know, psychology, you can sense, you know, people. And then as you get on, you realize there's certain themes that everybody goes, like a fortune teller, you know. The fortune teller, what they call a cold reader. You ever hear of a cold reader? These are people that exist. A cold reader, first of all, doesn't have a degree, so you can't say. Basically, gypsy fortune teller. These are astute people. Besides the knowledge of the symbols and the spirits, they know about human nature. So they know about human nature. For instance, a cold reader is a person who cold reader. Well, it's like a spiritual person. You know, some people don't want to go to a psychotherapist. They oh, I don't need it. They think it's, you know, but they'll go to a reader because it's non-threatening in that sense. You know, they'll go to a reader. So there's these people there, like a cold reader means that the person is, as soon as a person walks in, they just look at them. And they observe them, and in the first second, they already know a tremendous amount. And everybody has that ability. The way people walk, the way they dress, the way little things, the rings on their fingers, little tiny, little motions. We're all picking up. Everybody's picking. Every time you meet a person, and everybody's using intuition to make judgments on people. The first second you meet a person, you're making a judgment. You know. Unfortunately, sometimes if it's not pure, sometimes the judgment is based on what we have concepts about, you know, well, this person is this, you know. But we're picking up minute details every second with people, you know. I mean, it's something that happens. You meet people the first time. Some people you feel right away. Some people have negative energies. You know, you met people, some people that drain your energies. They'll take your energies away. This is another thing.
What would you say your most spiritual experience has been? If you had to pick one. Most mind expanding.
Oh God! Well, I would say my one of my it was a psychedelic trip. What was MDA? You know about that? DMA or what? DMA or MD? Yeah, but I had it in its pure form when I shot it, and this was interesting. This goes back also to the Brubeck. There's a North Carolina. There's a place called the North Carolina School of the Arts. You ever hear of that? It's like a very well-known art school. It goes from preschool up all the way to college. Dance, music, everything. Danny Brubeck went there. Some of the Brubeck people. And there was this fellow. They used to call him Uncle Tommy. He was a genius chemist, and he lives right near the North Carolina School of the Arts. And he was the one who discovered MDA, who discovered what I said. In the library, they had big medical libraries at the university, he would go and he found out the story. See, most psychedelic drugs were first used in hospital situations on patients, that they were tried, I mean, that was their purpose, to subdue people or to have them, you know what I mean? This is how everything's, any psychedelics, when it became into the mainstream, when I first turned on, who turned me on? A guy that David Solomon. He wrote one of the first books on crass and acid. He was getting the stuff from the hospitals. Nurses and doctors were the first people that got that stuff. Right?
Was he using ketamine as well as MDA?
Not at that time. I can't remember. I don't know at that time. Well, what is that ketamine?
Ketamine, it's been around a lot, but it's recently gone through a big upsurgence in the past 3 years. It's had the names Vitamin K, and currently they call it Special K. And
well, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And day is being used in it's ecstasy, which is a mix of MDA, heroin, and cocaine.
Oh boy, that would be hot. Well, I'll tell you a guy that another guru of this day and age who I've been reading recently, just in the last couple of years, is Terence McKenna. You know of him? Terence McKenna, dig this. You gotta this cat, man. He's an ethnobiologist that specializes in mushrooms, but he's also an anthropologist, sociologist, but you know, mycology, a mushroom study. You know, his theory. He has a book. He has a few books out. He wrote one on the magic mushroom. The one that I got is a series of writings that he did through the years up until about '89. It's called Archaic Revival, and that's what he calls what's going to happen, Archaic Revival. He says that's exactly what, going back to the Druids, the Wicca, going back to the way it was, that's what we need. This planet has to get to that consciousness again. I mean, we still will use technology, but we have to get to that consciousness again. And this is the next step of evolution of our minds. It's really going back to what it was. He calls it the Archaic Revival, which is an interesting term. You know. He has some very interesting themes about psychedelics. For instance, his theory is that our human consciousness is dependent on our evolution as a human race on psychedelics, and especially the mushroom. I mean, he goes into it. It's very fascinating. A certain kind of mushroom only grows in cow dung. Did you know that? So that going way back with grazing, pastoral life, early, that in cow dung, the spores grow of a certain one of the most potent mushrooms. I forget what it is. You know, it's the only place it grows. Only place it grows. I mean, that's, you know, things like this. And he traces way back in primitive man as they start farming and things, and how we lost it, you know. How in the early days psychedelics were growing all over, and man first tasted it, and something happened. You know, so he says that psychedelics absolutely have a definite, important part in playing of evolution of our brain throughout history. I mean, he has a very interesting theory. Then he goes out, and he says, that's what's happening. He said the 60s, he says, but people are not experiencing you don't have real, you have astronauts of space going up in space, but you don't have people who are dedicated astronauts of the psychedelics and of the plant. He calls it the plant intelligence. He says the plant and the human intelligence, all intelligence, they're completely intertwined. They have been for, you know, shamans talk to the plants, all these things goes way back. The plant is a consciousness, it's an intelligence, it's a, you know, the divas, the divi, the plant has its own, you know, what do you call it, oversoul or something, consciousness, you know. He talks about UFOs. His impression is, he says, first of all, if you're going to be a psychedelic astronaut, you got to take tremendous amount of dosages to get the effect that he's talking about, what he's talking about. You've heard it, Lily, you know Lily, the dolphin guy, what's his name?
Yeah, in fact, he was the one that he used ketamine.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? He went to he went into the isolation thing. He started communicating with extra, you know, whatever it was, you know. McKenna says that with the mushrooms, this species, he says you can't. He says you have to take a tremendous. Oops, you have to take a tremendous amount, and then he says what happens. He describes it. It's fascinating. God. He says they say they talk to you. Says, and then you go back to Carlos Castaneda, if you know some of that. You know, he's Carlos Castaneda, Don Juan. In the '60s, this first came out. This was a shaman. Carlos Castaneda was a anthropologist who wanted to study the effects on societies on psychedelics, or know about the cactus. Slowly, he met this guy Don Juan, who was a shaman. And there's a series of 10, 15 books that he became, like the story of Don Juan taught him how to, you know, to be a sorcerer. They call it sorcery. You should check out. It's fantastic. Talking to everything, you know, changing shape and form, doing things. But Terence McKenna says when you get in the highest plane and the highest, and you talk to the mushroom, will start speaking to you, and he says they told him. Mushrooms speak to you and says, yes, we come from outer space. We come, the spores of these mushrooms. He said, we come, and you think of it, because spores can live in a vacuum. And there's interstellar winds going through the universe, interstellar things, So he's saying, and he's experienced, and of course, in there, he says, well, of course, a lot of people aren't going to believe this, and he says, whatever it is, he says, but when you have this experience and take it to thousands of micro, not just, like now with vitamin C, they're telling people to take, with vitamin C, what they're telling people to take, to say that thousands of milligrams, way beyond. Linus Pauling, about him, this famous, he was a doctor who was dying of cancer. And he got this vitamin C thing, and he took amazing dosages. Nobody ever knew how much you could take of vitamin C. Thousands of milligrams. I'm talking heavy, And same thing with the psychedelics. We don't take enough. We get off, but we don't let it go that extra mile with the psychedelics, where we will communicate with this intelligence, the plant, whatever it is that is through the universe. And so he's saying. But you should read his stuff. He's positive about this. He says, yes, there is a shift of consciousness definitely coming. He says it's it. He calls it archaic revival. The next stage of evolution is actually a strange way to come back to where we were, but with all that we know from splitting off the brain. See, that's, when you would start earlier, you said, somebody said, we had the Druids. We had to learn what that split was. The human mind had to experience that split of being separate, to cause all this stuff to happen, to realize that we really are one. But we had to split in order, and we always have to come to close to this. Who knows what, so it is a part of evolution. It's not unnatural. If we blow ourselves up, who's to say is that unnatural? It might be. One scientist once said, hey, once a famous scientist had a great saying on the very. He said, look, if we don't make it here, you can be sure somewhere in the universe will go on. But it's, but.
Let's go back to, we were talking about your most spiritual experience, and you were saying it was during
Well, it was MDA. It was two experiences. One was musical with acid, with this very bass player, Henry Grimes, on my first album. That was probably my first.
Tell me about that one.
I had taken a bit during that whole period. I was taking a lot of psychedelic. We would take acid, but not tremendous amounts. We were playing. That's how a lot of the free music came, by just taking acid or getting really high and just playing together without any concept. Just let it happen, But I had a friend of mine who was a purveyor of pure Owsley acid. Now, Owsley was the great chemist of the '60s in San Francisco. Sandoz, he worked for Sandoz company. You know about the history of acid and Sandoz, Swiss stuff in Europe. This guy Owsley made the most pure acid in San Francisco. And this friend of mine, a musician and poet from England, but he lived here in the States, he had a connection with it, and he would get it in. And he had a big loft down in 14, during the '60s. He would get this shit. He'd have a woman, there was a woman courier would come in with a briefcase on a plane, like a businesswoman, nobody would know. She'd come in with a briefcase full of this. It was the powder, but so you had capping parties, what they call a capping party, because it was just the powder and you have the capsules. So you have to fill up, the capsules. How do you do that? You're looking at your finger, what I mean? You're going, you're doing this. By the time you're completely. So I was there at they were having a capping party one night. I was there, and Henry was there, the bass player. And we were licking, everybody was getting stoned. And then my friend, we called him English Mike Efron. He also recorded on ESP, but he knew me, and he says, you know what? He says, here we are with all this acid, the best acid in the world. He says, would you trust me? He says, I know you for years. He said, here, Henry Grimes, this great bass. He said, would you trust me to give you the dosage that I think that you could handle? So again, he said, would you trust me? And it was out, because it was an unlimited supply there. It was the powders, it was like fucking. And it's, at that moment, I was already a bit stoned. Something about it, I said, okay, Mike. I said, hey, lay down. You know. So he gave, I took, I don't know how many capsules, you know. Also gave it to the bass player, Henry Grimes. After a while, it hit like 20 tons, man. I experienced what Leary talked about, the great water. First of all, I had to lie down. My heart, I couldn't breathe. I didn't know if I was breathing. I thought I was going to go. I thought I was going to go, my whole body. Then I felt everything in the body, the veins. I felt the water. I felt things going through my, I felt the whole inner body working. Scary as a mother. I couldn't even feel the heart pump. And later, in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Leary used to write about this. He said he called the great waterways of the inner body. When you're on acid, you're going to, because we're so used to outside stimulus, we don't even know. We don't know what makes anything work in our bodies. We have no control. The arteries, things, you know, it all happens automatically, right? But to get to such a psychedelic state where you feel the inner workings of your body, you feel the blood going through, you know what I mean? Whew. And I was lying out on the couch and it was just coming, and I didn't know if I was breathing. I couldn't tell if I was breathing or not, and I just got panicked in a moment. I was feeling this inner body like I never felt, but I remember that Leary had pointed this out as one of the things that you could, when you really get a large dosage, you know. And somehow I just came through it, you know. And I got through that crucial point where I didn't know if I was going to live, I didn't know anything. Came out of it. I was still, but then I was in a straight plane, but so fucking high, man. After I came out of the body thing, I was so fucking high. And I had my horn there, and Henry had his bass there, and we just started playing. And that was one of the greatest of all that. There again, where music becomes one, the sound, synesthesia, you know that word? Where taste is sound, sound is taste, all the cross senses, you know, the things were happening then. I was playing with an embouchure. That's when I realized I play with a certain kind of embouchure. See, saxophonists, most of them, I don't know if you ever played a horn, but the mouthpiece, you put your teeth on top. You clamp your teeth and you cover the bottom. That's the normal way. But some people, and I played with the double, I played without the teeth. I'd fooled around with it before that. I had a teacher that taught me that way. That was Italian method, you know. But the jazz people have that teeth on top. They can clamp down and get power, and then it's not great for the teeth. A lot of great Coltrane lost all his teeth. But I was playing this. It was the first time I started playing this natural embouchure without the teeth, and it was so natural. It's fun. I did that. Since then, I've just done it ever since. You know. The playing together was, you talked about spiritual music, it was like waves of color, waves of sound, fingers moving effortlessly, no thought, just playing, beyond any concept, you know, breathing with the other person, breath, feeling the movement of things around you, and it was just, I mean, woo, dynamite. That was one of the highest ever. That's when I realized the spiritual connection of music and the soul and the world. And when you're in a natural flow, it's just happening of itself. You know, in many spiritual readings, they always say it seems like it's happening of itself. We're just vehicles where things are coming through. You know that saying? That's what it was. We were playing music. I don't know what it was. Just we were. It was like breath, breathing. You know, together. And we never taped any of that, unfortunately. I would have loved to.
Do you feel you have a purpose in the universe?
Huh?
Do you feel you have a purpose?
Oh God, I think we all do. You know, there's a few cliche answers to that. You know, the one I always said, the one that sounds simple but deceptive, is to become more of what we are. Think about that, right? And that's something I've always, to become more of what we are, you know, whatever.
And what are you? What are you trying to become more of?
Well, we're all trying to become, to get in our own, I mean, we're individuals. See, the thing is, each person's an individual being, nobody else like them, each like a fingerprint. Every person is unique bubble of the entire universe. I mean, we're individual bubble, but we're all part of the same thing. The collective, we're all one. So it's defining your unique, your individual, becoming more of what each person is as an individual, with their talents, with their openness, with getting rid of all of it, and then linking up with the whole universal structure, like the Wicca thing. But it's first getting to know yourself. It's deep. We all go through it. being your own analyst, realizing all the shit you've gone through in your life. I mean, you have to, you know, your fears, face things, do your own work. I mean, it's a task, you know. Just clearing yourself out so you can be optimally what you are as an individual being who is at the same time individual, but one is part of everything, you know. So each person has a unique function, and there's no one else like an individual. You know, we're an atom in the universe. Each atom is an individual atom, but it all makes up. You know, it's funny to. So to become of more of what we are, to become of what we are, and by doing that, by being an example, by being that, it's what the gurus want to become. Without saying they're a guru, but you want to live what you believe. You want to get to a point where you can actually live what you know and what you feel. You know, like one of the great statements. You remember Leary, Baba Ram Das? Did you ever know about this? He was a Leary. You know about Leary? Was a psychologist, and Richard Alpert was this other psychologist who later got so spiritually went to a whole Indian thing. He called himself Baba Ram Das. His famous book of the '60s, which is still out, it's called "Be Here Now." See, because all the spiritual talks about that. They say, "Oh yeah, you got to be here at the moment. You can't be living in the past. Can't be living in the future. You know, you got every moment. Zen. Every moment is like the ancients. The plans. There's no time in that sense. You know. But that's hard to do. It's easy. We have everyday life. We have the. It's nice to say, you know, be here now. But that's now another thing I was very attracted to, if you call it spiritual. Very important influence on me was Zen and Alan Watts. You know of him? He's one of the first teachers of the West that brought in the understanding of Eastern Zen into Western world. Beautifully. He was an Episcopalian minister. He was all kinds of stuff. His books are wonderful. But, I mean, he's one of my great gurus. You know, he had many books: Nature, Man and Woman, Psychotherapy, East and West, all kinds of things. You know, to hook up again with the universe, to get back what we've lost, to realize that we are one. We've lost the connection. We've lost the basic connection. And the fear. That's why we have wars. That's why everybody's afraid. Power. You know, it all comes from fear. What power comes from lording it over? That's fear of not knowing anything. You know.
We teach the planet, society, one thing.
Well, I mean.
What would you want?
Well, God, I tell everybody to try to release all the try to be honest with themselves and give up all the negative stuff and try to release all the blocks and, you know, be your own therapist. I mean, like, really work hard on that. Work hard on that. Realize that all this fear that we all are feeling is not what the universe intends for us. I mean, to put it in a prosaic way, you know. We're a great species. I mean, supposedly we're known on other planets. You know, another thing is that this planet is considered by many of the occult teachings is to be a teaching space, a teaching station, this planet, right? It's supposed to be a place where we come to learn lessons, you know, karmic lessons, whatever that is.
You said to become what the universe intends. What do you think the universe intends?
The universe intends for us to come home again and to be part of the universe. I mean, it's just coming home. So we've been away from home.
So like the rainbow's greeting is welcome home.
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. Welcome home. That's what we all need to do now, you know. And that's what all the forces as we approach this coming up is impelling us to do. You know, whoever is going to see it and can work with it and understand it. I mean, I do say that things are coming up so fast. There can be a lot of human beings that maybe aren't ready to change yet.
Where does fear come from, do you think?
Oh God, fear of not knowing where we come from, what it's all about. Fear of a primitive man looking up at the sky. What are we? We're here, these people, you know. Fear of thinking we're alone. It's fear of the unknown. A fear of the unknown. What we call the unknown.
Is that ignorance or is that something else?
It's both. It's both. It's both. Because we didn't have that, and early man didn't have that. You know, early, all these things were there. There wasn't that. It was developed. It was just something that came through evolution. You know, evolution caused it to happen. It's in a split between the right.
Well, is it evolution? Because like small children don't have that fear.
Exactly.
Is it taught,
exactly.
Or is it inbred?
It's no. I think it's yeah. I would have to say it's cultural. I would say more than anything. It's not. I mean, fear. You know. I mean, the element of fear is for survival. That's another thing. You to survive. But we're talking about cultural, man-made fear. It definitely comes from, because, like you say, children experience all kinds of. They talk to fairies. They talk to people. We lose that at a certain age. We get the Western consensus of how it should be, and that fucks us up, because we always are fucking. We always, underneath somehow, we know we've been cheated. We know we've lost something. We know something's happened to us, but we don't know what. That's another thing. With frustration, everybody has, because at times every human being, no matter what, is going to have that moment of thinking something inside. God, what the hell? You know, something's taken away, or I'm not making any connections, or there must be more than what you know what I mean? That everybody has that to some degree, that feeling, God, it's just not the way it should be, or just not, but it's not articulated by many people.
People such as Bradshaw say we should get in touch with the inner child. Do you think that's a good path? Do you think, or the path of moving forward rather than trying to move back?
No, I think it's all part of it. See, the beautiful thing about the whole metaphysics is that the past, present, future exist simultaneously. And physics is showing this too now. So in other words, you can change your past. I mean, you can go back in your past and well, therapy does that in a certain way. Scientology is a way, but that's a different way. In other words, clearing up, going back and clearing out the charges, the emotional charges that we have. Yeah, I think going back. I don't think heavily delving in psychoanalytic. I think because the child, it's not a thing of the past. That child is still in us. It's never gone.